Hi, I'm Mark Cunningham with Grace Property Management here in Denver. As we prepare to enter into 2025, we thought we would take a few minutes and explain what we have seen as the 5 of the most common mistakes we're seeing landlords and housing providers in Colorado make by not paying attention and not being aware of some of the recently passed laws in Colorado. So as we go through these 5 laws, keep in mind one important thing. It doesn't matter if you're a housing provider managing one property, maybe you bought a duplex, you live in one side and you rent out the other, or if you're a corporate landlord owning thousands upon thousands of single family or multifamily properties. All of these laws apply to every housing provider in Colorado, regardless of the size, regardless of the situation. If you are renting out a property, these 5 things apply to you and to me as a property management company across the board. Now we'll take these in order of least importance, ending in number 5, the most important thing you want to make sure you're doing as a housing provider to stay compliant and not getting in trouble. So number 1 is simply some new lease language. There's a lot of new lease language that the legislature required in 2024 that must go into effect in 2025 in your lease or your lease renewal that you offer to your tenant. So for example, one of the new requirements has to have new lease language regarding the updated warranty of habitability. Habitability has been legally redefined and you must put specific language into your lease, and the law governs specifically even the size of the font, and it must be in bold. Has to be in your lease. You have to get this language correct. In this video, we'll link to each of these laws. This was SB 24094. You think, okay, well that's easy enough. I can certainly put things in my lease. There's another law that passed, same law but a different provision that requires additional lease language. This part of SB 24094 requires that you to make specific language in your lease regarding how maintenance requests can be made to your company. You have to give an email address, you have to give your physical location, you have to say where it can be mailed to. This language not only must be in specific font size, but it must be in English and in Spanish in your lease. Now keep in mind, there are penalties for not putting this in your lease. So those are 2 of the first things that just have to do with lease language. There's also a new provision that requires you as a housing provider to respond to habitability repair issues within 24 hours. You have to have a 24-hour response time in certain issues if it's a habitability related issue. You say, well, what's habitability? Well, this new law completely redefined habitability. So anything you heard prior to this year about habitability, ignore. You need to read SB 24094. We will link to it here to understand, because it has very detailed response times. And if there's mold, for example, it gives additional carve-outs. You've got to inform tenants of their potential ability to request a hotel stay in potential habitability. It's very complicated, very complex, but very important you follow it so that you don't get yourself penalized for stepping outside of these requirements. Number 4 most common mistake we see is regarding notices. HB 241098 this last year requires that demand notices, that includes rent demand notices. So if your resident doesn't pay rent and you have to post them with a notice of payment due, that notice must be in the preferred language of your tenant. So if you serve a notice, a demand notice in English, and the tenant doesn't pay and you initiate the legal eviction process, you could get that thrown out if the if the primary language of the resident is not English. Now, how do you find out what their primary language is? Well, you need to find that out upon the application side of things. And if you have any reason to know, is what the law says, you have to require that your notices are being prepared in that language. Now, you can imagine the logistical side of this. It can get pretty complicated pretty quickly. For example, in the last month, we've had tenants rent properties of ours. We have one tenant who is Burmese. That means if we serve any kind of a notice, it has to be in Burmese. We've had another French tenant who just rented from us recently, so any notice we post has to be translated for those 2 tenants into Burmese and also French. But again, it doesn't matter if it's us, a larger single family property management company, or you who may be managing one property. This applies to both of us across the board. And the last one I'll share relates to applicant screening. Now there's a lot of new requirements for you and for me as it relates to how we screen applicants of our properties. Just a couple things, a couple random pieces. Number one, you need to make sure that your applicant screening process does not require the applicant's income to be more than 2 times the amount of the monthly rent. Anything more than that is illegal for you to require in your screening process. As long as they make 2 times the amount of the rent, that income box is checked. And you can still have other requirements on the applicant screening side of things, but as it relates to income, if you say, for example, oh, our minimum income is 3 times the amount of the rent, you can't do that. That's illegal. The most you can require is 2 times. Number 2, you cannot even pull credit if the applicant receives subsidized payments. So if the applicant receives a government subsidy for their rent and they apply to rent your property, it is illegal for you to pull a credit report for that individual tenant. And a third aspect of things you have to keep in mind as well, that if the tenant or the applicant brings you what is called a portable screening report, meaning they got their own background report, which they've pulled and it has to meet certain criteria, but if they provide that to you, you must accept that report. Now, every one of these is very detailed, very nuanced. We are not attorneys. This is not legal advice, but these are things you need to be aware of as a housing provider in Colorado, because there are significant penalties for not following these particular laws. Now, we're recording this video here in late November. We've just completed our annual letter to all of our owner clients, which gives a review of 2024 as well as a preview of what we expect the Denver rental market to do in 2025. If you'd like to view that, simply jump on our website, rentgrace.com/2025, and you can read that there. We'll also link to that in the video notes here. You can click over there, see what we say about 2024 and what our expectations are for 2025 for Denver housing providers. If we can be of service in any way, please consider us a resource. Jump on our website, rentgrace.com. We're happy to help in any way we can, and we wish you a successful 2025.